Hey Code Crew, Ellen and I have had this app idea for the past year and we've done nothing with it up until this weekend. I set up a landing page for the app so that I could start collecting email addresses and build a pre-launch audience. I also created a quick app prototype so that we can start getting some user feedback on some of the app navigation and elements that are on the screen. Now, before I tell you what this app idea is, I want to tell you about how I was able to build a website and app prototype in a weekend. You see, I discovered this tool called Webflow, which lets you easily design, prototype, build, and deploy websites all without code. Now hold up, I know what you're thinking. A website builder? Don't you teach people how to code on this channel? Yes, but this tool is different. You see, Webflow is a tool that is designed for professionals. It produces high-quality, production-ready code that any web developer would write. And you know me, I'm all in for time efficiency and savings. So in this video course, I'm going to teach you how to do two things. Number one is how to build an app prototype quickly so that you can start testing it and getting some feedback on it, showing it to people. Number two, how to build a landing page to market your app, because we all know apps don't market themselves, right? So if you have an app idea, follow along and start taking some action on it, just like I did this weekend. All right, let's do this. Hi, I'm Chris, and if this is your first time here, welcome to Code with Chris, where we'll teach you how to build an app even if you've never coded before. Now, special thanks to Webflow for sponsoring this video so that I can show you guys just how special this tool is. Now, at first glance, it might seem that Webflow is one of the many website builders out there, but when I took a closer look, I was surprised. Hang out in any web developer and designer circles and you'll see Webflow being mentioned. If professionals are talking about Webflow, that really piques my curiosity. Then I went on their website and I discovered that Webflow can be used for end-to-end web development, from designing, prototyping, building, deploying, and even hosting your website. What really impressed me as well is that Webflow has CMS capabilities. You see a lot of designs and prototypes out there using placeholder text, placeholder images and stuff like that. With Webflow, you can define your data structure, import your content, and then display it through your website. And check out this little bit here. You can even hook up your native iOS app to feed off of the CMS of your Webflow website. This is perfect for those people who want to build a website and also have a companion mobile app. Now, if this is a demo that you'd like to see in the future, let me know by leaving a comment below. But I gotta say, the thing that really sold it to me was seeing what Webflow was capable of producing. I mean, these showcase sites look fluid, dynamic, and in general, just really professional. I wouldn't believe that these were built using a tool. Once I signed up for an account, which is free by the way, I immediately noticed that the UI is not geared towards beginners. It looks like a professional tool like you would see with Xcode or Sketch or something like that. And I'm a person that doesn't really like tools or things that are too beginner oriented, because usually that comes with limiting your creative freedom and what you can do with it. I would rather have a powerful tool that I need to invest some time into learning and getting comfortable with, just so I know that I'm not limited in the future by what I can do with it. So invest I did. I spent the next couple of days playing around with Webflow, really digging into it and using it to build something. Now I'm going to split this video into 3 sections, and I'll leave timestamps in the description below so that you can jump around. In part 1, I'm going to give you a rundown of the Webflow UI and how to do the basics. In part 2, I'll show you and walk through how I built my app prototype using Webflow. And in part 3, I'm going to show you how I built a landing page for my app, as well as hooking it up to a MailChimp account so that I could start collecting email addresses and start building that all too important pre-launch audience. If you want to follow along, just sign up for a free Webflow account. It's completely free to use and to experiment with. You don't have to pay anything until you actually want to host your site with Webflow, and at that point, the plans are really affordable. Use the link on the screen or in the description below to go and create your free Webflow account right now. So after clicking through the link, you'll arrive at the Webflow homepage. Go ahead and click the Get Started button, either this big blue one right here or in the upper right hand corner. And you're going to be able to create a free account using your email and password or signing in with Google. Either way, it's going to be a fast sign up process, and before you know it, you'll be at your new dashboard like this. Now I have some projects here which I'm going to show you how to build, but you won't have any. What I want you to do is click this new project blue button in the upper right hand corner. you'll be presented with a choice, either to start with a blank site or to use one of their many templates to build off of and customize. Now, I would recommend to start with a blank site because I'm going to show you all of the basics. And then once you get a hang of those, it'll be easy for you to customize an existing template. So go ahead and choose blank site and name it anything you'd like. I'm going to name it sample. Wait a couple of seconds and then you'll be presented with your brand new website. So let's do a walkthrough of the major parts of the Webflow user interface that you're going to be using most of the time to build your website. First of all, let's take a look at this big white area here on your screen. That's where you're going to see a visual representation of your web page. Right now it's empty because we don't have anything on it. Why don't we get started by adding some elements on the screen? So I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side. That's where you're going to see a bunch of different menu items. The first one is called Add Elements. Take note that the shortcut key is A, so you can either click this or hit A on your keyboard to bring it out. By bringing out this library of elements, you're going to be able to click on any of them to instantly add them on your web page. Up top, there are some pre-built ones where these are common sections that you see on websites all over the internet, and Webflow has made it really handy for you to add these common sections with a simple pre-built layout. If you scroll down below, you have various layout containers and layout elements, down to things like paragraphs, headings, buttons, images, videos, and all sorts of things that you're going to use as building blocks to build your web page. Let's just get started by choosing the hero section. So click on that, and instantly you're going to see this pre-built layout on your web page. Notice that it's also added an element in your navigator. Click on an element such as the heading here, and you're going to see that it drills down to the heading element. Click on this paragraph element and you can see that it's highlighted that over there. Expand this paragraph element, you'll see 3 pieces of bold text. Hover over it and you'll see it tells you exactly where that bold text is. So essentially the navigator is an element by element breakdown of your web page right here. So it's really, really handy because it tells you exactly how things are positioned and how things are nested within each other. For this navigator menu, you can either press Z on your keyboard to toggle it on and off, or you can click this menu item here. That's the second menu item. You can also pin it if you don't want it to disappear, because this is a pretty handy menu to have open. I want to go through a couple of other ones before we hop on over to the right side of the screen. Let's click on this third one, Pages, and the shortcut key for that is P. Now this is where you're going to manage all of the different pages of your website. You can see by default we have been customizing the home page. Also a password and a 404 page have been created for you by default, so you can actually remove that if that's not something that you need to use. However, this is handy because as you're building your website, you don't want people to access it yet, so you can set a password and that will prevent that from happening. And then when you're ready to go live, then you don't need that page anymore. So to add new pages to your website, you can click this button here. Like maybe you're going to need an about page or a contact us page or something like that. This is where you would add that and also manage all of the various pages in terms of organization, because you can add folders and you can add pages inside folders and all that good stuff. Now you'll notice that up here, it also tells you which page you're working on, and that's really handy because sometimes in the thick of things you can forget which page you're customizing. So up here at a glance you can see that we're working on the home page, and clicking this will actually also pop open the Pages menu. So this is essentially how you're going to be building your website page by page. Now I'm going to draw your attention to the next 2 items. This one is CMS, which stands for Content Management System. And this is a very powerful feature of Webflow where you can add your data items to your project that are going to be powering your site. So as you're building your site, you don't need to work with lorem ipsum and pieces of placeholder text and placeholder images. You can actually use the pieces of data that are going to be live on your site by adding them to CMS here. Think of it as sort of like a mini database. Next, we also have e-commerce. If you're building a shop, then you can customize your products, your categories, and stuff like that here. So you can definitely use Webflow to build an e-commerce site. Next up, we have assets. Now this is very important, and you'll commonly use this menu item because this is where you're going to keep all of your media assets such as images and documents and animations and stuff like that. As we're going to go through this tutorial, you'll see me dragging and dropping those items in here, and then we're going to be selecting them from the interface from the canvas here. And then this last menu item are just the settings for the website. Now, why don't we go ahead and select a couple of items? I want to draw your attention to what happens on this right-hand side when I select a different element. You'll see that it changes slightly. When I select the media element, you're going to see a couple of different things. When I select the button, you'll see different things, and as well as common things. Essentially, this right-hand side lets you customize that specific element that you've selected. It lets you customize attributes and CSS classes. Don't worry so much if you're not familiar with those things, because I will explain them. Plus, as you watch this tutorial, you're going to see me customize many of the same attributes over and over again. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into this attributes pane right now, but just note that this pane, this area right here, is for customizing the elements that you select either from your canvas or from the navigator. Next, I want to talk about this ribbon across the top, this sort of toolbar. This green check mark will probably stand out the most, and this lets you know that all the changes that you've made up to that point have been saved. So when you see that green check mark, you can kind of be at ease. You can also preview your design. You can hit this button and it previews it. Notice that when you hit that, you still have these buttons here, and these buttons represent previewing and also customizing your website for various screen sizes. So this is sort of the default desktop screen size. If you click on this, it's a tablet one. This is a landscape mobile device, and this is a portrait mobile device, so that you can make sure your website looks beautiful and perfect on every single screen size. Now let's get out of preview mode. If you wanted to, let's say, customize how your website looks, maybe you'd want to hide some elements for a specific experience, you can go to that screen size and then you can change some elements, and it will only apply for that screen size. Now, one thing to note, without diving too far in, because I am going to be showing you this stuff later on, just take note that when you're customizing your website for the various screen sizes, you should be working from left to right, because the changes that you make to the screen sizes on the left affect everything on the right. So let's say that you customize something on the tablet screen size. Those customizations will also affect the mobile screen sizes. And likewise, any customizations you make to the mobile landscape screen size affects the portrait one. So it sort of cascades down from left to right. But keep in mind, it doesn't go the other way around. So if you customize something from the mobile portrait screen size, it does not carry through backwards. It always goes from left to right, biggest to smallest. All right, now let's go through a couple of other menu items on this ribbon here. You have undo and redo, and I'm going to gloss over these for a second. This publish menu is going to allow you to publish your website on a Webflow domain. Now you can opt for a custom domain later on, but as you're working on your site, it's very easy to see your website in a live setting simply by hitting publish. So let's go ahead and publish to their default domain. And then you'll also get this icon here to open a new browser window and see your website at a website URL. And you can send this to anybody. You can launch it on your mobile device. You can launch it on your tablet just to see how your website is looking. So I think this is really, really cool. So believe it or not, those are kind of the main functions and features of using Webflow to build your website. It's not that complicated, right? In the tutorial, you'll see me drill deeper into various attributes and customizations and things like that. But at a high level, those are the main areas that you'll be using to build your website. Now, just for the benefit of those people who are not familiar with HTML, CSS, and media queries and stuff like that, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to give you a primer on that stuff, just so you can appreciate how the various aspects of the Webflow user interface that I've pointed out map back to actual writing of HTML, CSS, and media queries. HTML is the language for building web pages. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's essentially a collection of tags and attributes that make sense to a web browser. For example, a web page has an opening and closing HTML tag. Notice the opening tag doesn't have a / while the closing tag does. When a web browser reads this, it knows, oh, this is a web page that I can display. Inside the HTML tags, you have an opening and closing body tag. Now, in between these body tags is where you'll add all of the other HTML tags to represent your web page. For example, I can display a paragraph using a set of p tags, and then I can put the text in between them. Notice that these elements are nested within each other, and there's sort of a hierarchy that forms as you add more HTML elements to your document. Now let's say I wanted to customize my paragraph to show bold text instead. Well, I can add a style attribute to my p tag and write CSS to indicate that the text should be bold. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's used for styling HTML elements. Now, there are multiple ways to work with CSS. I can either style individual HTML elements as you can see here, or I can create a named CSS class that contains a set of styles and just indicate that my HTML element should use that class. Using CSS classes are preferred because it keeps the styles separate from the HTML tags and also keeps you from writing duplicate CSS code on each HTML element. Now, there's a variety of HTML tags that you can use and CSS code that you can write, but essentially that's how HTML and CSS works in a nutshell. Next, I want to mention media queries, which are essentially sets of styles which get applied depending on the screen size the user is on. Now, for example, we might have a set of styles that get applied if the user is on a tablet, just to make sure everything fits on the screen and looks nice. And we might have another set of styles for mobile devices so that all of the elements are a little more narrow, a little smaller, and maybe there's less margins to maximize the amount of space on the limited screen size, right? Just to make sure things are easy to read. We might make text a little bigger on the mobile screen size and things like that. So to sum it up, media queries are like sets of styles that get applied depending on what screen size your user is on. Now that you know a little bit about HTML, CSS, and media queries, I want to bring it back to Webflow to really help you understand how Webflow produces production-ready, clean, high-quality code. Let's start by taking a look at the Add Elements menu. Remember, that's shortcut key A on your keyboard. Now, save for these pre-built layouts, all of these things down here, these are all HTML elements. And when you add one of them onto your screen, you're essentially adding that HTML tag to your document. So you can see this paragraph one, this is the P tag that we talked about. Let's go to the navigator. Here's the body tag that I showed you. And within that, we have a variety of different HTML tags. And you can see the sort of nested structure that I was telling you about as you build out your HTML document. So adding these elements onto your Webflow document here is essentially just writing HTML tags. And in your navigator here, this is a representation of your HTML hierarchy. Now let's click on our paragraph element and take a look at this right-hand side here, all of these attributes. All of these things that you can configure, the spacing, the margin, the padding, the width, the typography, all of these different things are essentially CSS code or CSS attributes that you can add to your paragraph element. So by customizing it, let's say that I wanted to make this bold, right? And I change it from normal to bold. Well, essentially, you can see the text here visually, but behind the scenes, it's applied that bold CSS tag to my P element or my paragraph element. Furthermore, we talked about CSS classes, right? We don't want to keep repeating the same CSS code for each individual element. Well, over here under selector, this is where you would specify your CSS class. So this paragraph is essentially a CSS class. I can rename it, let's say, let me call it bold text. And if I were to add another paragraph element to my layout, let's say I am going to add another paragraph element right under the heading here. I'm going to press A and I'm going to click on paragraph, and you can see it's added another one here, right? If I say that this P element should use the CSS class bold text, you can see that it's applied here. And now when I change that set of styles for bold text, it applies to both. So let me show you what I mean. If I change the color to green, that's essentially changing the style for my CSS class called bold text. And because both of these paragraph tags use the CSS class bold text, both of them get changed, right? So we're reusing our styling here, and we're not styling individual elements. So as you can see through the Webflow user interface, you're essentially writing HTML and CSS, but just in a visual way. And we also talked about media queries. So that's what these are up here, right? Me customizing for the tablet screen, making customizations here, is essentially adding styles and setting styles for that tablet media query. And likewise goes for these guys. If I were to, let's say, change this heading to be pink or something like that. If I did that, anyone who was using a portrait mobile device coming to view my website would see a pink heading, and whoever came to visit on a desktop screen would see my normal black heading. Now, the best way to think about Webflow, and these are not my words, but I heard this somewhere else, is that Webflow is a UI for code, because you're essentially writing code, but just in a visual way. It's not like other website builders where you can do whatever you want, and then behind the scenes, it just spits out code trying to get as close as possible to what you saw in the editor. Whereas for Webflow, even as a designer, you're essentially thinking in terms of HTML tags, you're thinking in terms of CSS, and you're thinking in terms of media queries. And that's why when this website gets produced, all the code is as if a web developer would have written it by hand. Now, seeing all of the elements you can add and all of the attributes you can customize, you might start getting overwhelmed. But just like Xcode and any other developer tool, the more you use it, the more you spend time with it, the more familiar it's going to get. Plus, now we're going to build something together, so things should really start to fall into place. In the following part, we're going to use what you've learned so far to build an app prototype. So for those of you guys who have been watching my videos and reading my content for a while, you might know the general app development process, but for those of you that don't, let me just quickly explain where prototyping fits in with the overall app development process. Now, I have a 10-step how to make an app guide that outlines this high-level process, and let's just scroll to the table of contents and see where prototyping fits in. So first you have an app idea, then you're going to validate your app idea maybe by doing some competitive research or asking around, showing people, talking to people, just making sure that it's an app idea worth pursuing. And then you're going to write out the features of your app, like what is it going to accomplish, what will it be able to do, and you're going to break it out into different phases. So in the beginning, you're going to want to take a smaller feature set just to test the waters first and not commit to building the whole thing and before finding out that maybe it's a failure. So you commit to a small feature set up front, otherwise known as your MVP or minimum viable product for those of you who have read the Lean Startup. And then after that, you start doing some information architecture, and this is where prototyping fits in. You start to decide, how is your app going to accomplish those features that you've written out? What sorts of screens will it have? What elements will be on each screen, with a focus on making it as pleasant and easy for the user as possible to accomplish his or her tasks. So you might start to do something like this to storyboard what the various screens are. You might start to lay out different elements, trying to find one that is easy to use, as well as one that doesn't require very much hand holding and tutorial. Like, you don't have to read a manual to learn how to use your app. And this is where prototyping is really handy, because there's only so much you can do on paper thinking about it. Whereas if you actually create sort of like a mini prototype, you can test things out, like navigation, for example. And only through testing and by actually having it in your hands and using it will you start to realize, like, oh, that thing that seemed like a good idea in my head doesn't really translate practically in real life. So those are the things that prototyping is good for. So why don't we jump into not Webflow yet. I just want to show you what I came up with in terms of a prototype. So typically I would start with a notebook and a pen and I would start sketching, but this time I decided to just dive right into Figma and start putting together some screens. And because it's so easy in Figma to add drop shadows and colors and stuff like that, I started getting carried away and started fleshing out a little bit about how the app would look. In this case, I am kind of stepping ahead of myself and stepping a little bit into the design phase where you're creating the actual look and feel of your app. But typically when you're doing wireframing and you're at that stage, you're just drawing boxes and stuff like that. And that's completely fine to go from those wireframe boxes to prototyping, because all you want to do again is to test navigation and how things feel when you're tapping around, not really caring about how things look and feel. All right, so this is what I did though. So I have a general idea of, this is what I'm trying to build. The navigation I'm thinking is going to be this button here that opens up more options to get to other screens and stuff like that. So what we're going to do is implement a prototype for this app in Webflow so that we can test things out, like the navigation and where things should sit. So why don't we minimize this? We go back to Webflow and we're going to create a brand new project. Again, we're going to start with a blank site. And I'm going to name this, I'm just going to call it prototype. And here we've got a blank site. However, we are going to start with this mobile portrait mode because after all, we are prototyping a mobile app, so it makes sense to start in this media query. Now, the first thing we're going to do is add a layout container to our page here. So go ahead and hit A on your keyboard or click this button here. And under layout, you're going to find this container element. If you're unsure of what these elements are, you can always click the question mark. Now this exists on every single element. Clicking it will just give you a little tooltip describing what it is. Essentially, the container is going to house all of the elements that are on our page. We're going to put everything else inside the container. The reason being is that we can apply margins to the container itself, and that will make sure that I don't have to do it for each individual element because the container houses everything. So let's go ahead and hit that container there, and you'll see it instantly there in your navigator nested under body. And then on the right hand side, having container selected, I'm going to go ahead and set margins on, or padding rather, 20 on the left, and then I'm going to hit this side and 20 on the right. Now, if you're not sure what the difference between padding and margin is, padding is padding for the content inside of it, whereas margin goes on the outside of the element. So when we're putting elements into the container, there will be a sort of padding of 20 pixels inside of the container on the left and right edges. The next thing we're going to do is add a heading element. Let's hit A, and we are going to scroll down and hit heading. And then that is going to be added to the container here. Now, one thing I want you to take note of is that when you add an element, it adds it under whatever was currently selected. So let me show you what I mean. Like, why did this heading show up inside the container and not, underneath the container, being part of the body instead? The reason is because I had the container highlighted. If I wanted the heading to not be inside the container, what I should have done is select body, hit A, and then choose heading. And as you can see, that becomes a child of the body container instead. So when you add elements, just remember that, because that is going to let you know what to expect about where it's going to show up. So let's hit delete. Let's choose our heading right here. Okay, we're just going to type out the greeting here, and then we're going to change the class. So we're going to add a class to this before we change the font size or the color or anything like that, because if we want to reuse this style, then giving it a name will allow us to do that. We can just apply the same class to another heading element if we need to in the future. So I'm going to call this one screen title. And then I'm going to go ahead down here and I'm going to change the size of it to 20. It being bold is fine, the font's fine. You'll see that as I set it to 20, this turns blue, right? And whereas these are orange, and there is a difference. So the ones that are highlighted blue means that it is directly set to this class. The screen title CSS class has a attribute where it sets the font size to 20. Whereas these orange ones, these I haven't explicitly set to be part of my screen title class. These settings are actually inherited from its parent. So if we take a look at where screen title is, this screen title heading is considered the child of the container. So this container element is actually the parent of screen title. And in turn, the container is a child of the body. And this sort of nested hierarchy, we talked about this earlier, and this is how HTML documents are laid out. But what I didn't explain is that when you set styles on a higher level element, those styles sort of get inherited by its children. So whatever styles I set here, let's say at the body level up here, I set text to be orange, then any elements inside the body, it's going to have orange text unless I explicitly set that element to not have orange text. So that's what this means. When I select the heading title, it tells me font being Arial. That property or that setting was inherited from a higher parent element. Same thing with the font weight, the color, and the height. Now this being blue means that that was an explicit thing that I have set on this element for the CSS class. So that's what those things mean. And then this being blue, if I click on it and I click reset, that's actually going to go back to orange, and it's going to take the value that it inherits from some parent element. All right, moving on. We are going to next select the container and then hit A, and we're going to add a div block. Now a div block is kind of like your basic HTML element. It's very malleable to change into whatever you'd want. It's typically used to house other elements as a container. So what are we going to do with this div block? Well, essentially we're going to kind of create a progress bar with it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a class on this. I'm going to call it like progress track, and I'm going to set its height to 15, and I'm going to set a background to it. So this is under size, position, typography, backgrounds, and set the background to gray. You can either type it in, or you can even click this guy to choose a color, or if you know the hex code, you can just go ahead and type that in. So I just configured it to that. That's fine. Next, if you want to round the corners, there is a CSS property for that too. It's called border radius, and here you can go ahead and round those corners. So why don't we go ahead and set that to 10. So you can see we have rounded corners. So we can go ahead and take a look at how this looks now, right? You can go preview it like that, or you can publish it and actually test it out on your phone or test it out in the web browser. So why don't we go ahead and publish this website right now? So hit publish, just publish to selected domains. And that's actually a very hard domain to type into my phone. I should have named it something else. Actually, it might not be. It's fine. All right, so we're gonna come here and launch this in the web browser. Now this doesn't look anything like what we had before, right? Well, that's because if you remember back in Webflow, we were customizing this screen size. So what we're gonna have to do is mimic that. You can either stretch your web browser, contract it to a sort of mobile view, but as you can see, I can't even get it down to that size. What I would do instead is open up developer tools. Usually if you're using a modern web browser, you'll have this sort of menu. On Chrome, you'll find it, I think it's down here. No, it's right here. So the shortcut key is actually Command, Option, and I, but in the menu system, it is buried right here. So that's where developer tools is. You click on that and you will bring up something that looks like this. Now, this tray here, you can see all of the code for it, but we're not going to dive into this right now. What I want you to click is this button right here, and that's going to allow you to adjust the screen size, right, to something that is more like a mobile app, something like that. And then that's when you can get an accurate representation of what you're building. So let's go back here and continue to customize it. Okay, so inside the progress track, we're going to add another div. Now, make sure you're highlighting the progress track, because if you're highlighting the container and you add a div, why don't we just go ahead and do that? Press A, you add a div, you can see it shows up under container because we had that highlighted. We're going to drag this guy inside the progress track like that, so that when you close the progress track, you see that div inside. Now for this div, I'm going to call it progress. As you can see, when I add a CSS class to that element, it shows up in the navigator named that way too. Okay, for this one, I'm going to set the height. Make sure you don't get confused, because there is the height of the div block and then there's height of the text. So make sure you are cognizant of what section you are customizing this in. For width, I'm going to type in 70%. Now check this out. This is different, right? This is a percentage, whereas this is an exact pixel amount. So you can click on that and you can actually select the unit. So just be aware of what you're setting, and you can just type in px as well if you want to set it, so you don't have to manually pull that down and change it. So I actually wanted 70%. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to just change the color to gray. And I'm also going to set the radius to 10. And that's going to give me more or less the same look as what I've got going here. All right, next up we have a little message. So we are going to hit the container, we're going to hit A, and then we're going to add a paragraph. So by default, it's a ton of text, but I think what I had instead was, I actually had a piece of text in front of the progress track, but that's fine. So let's just put it like that. And here I can drag this paragraph element above my progress track like that. And this sort of typography, the size is 14, that's okay. All right, so below the progress track, we're going to add another paragraph element. So hit A and add a paragraph. And this text is going to be this. So I'm going to grab that and paste that in there. Now you can see it's very close to the progress bar, but what you can do is hit this paragraph, then you can add some margin to the top. So you click that and you can add 10, let's say. Notice that as soon as you make a CSS customization, it will automatically generate a class name for you. So in the future, if you wanted other paragraph elements to have a 10 pixel margin at the top, you can reuse this CSS class, or you can actually just rename it like that. So I'm not going to rename it because I don't think I'll need to reuse it. I'll just leave it as paragraph. That's fine. Okay, now to create these three elements here, we're going to use something called a grid. So go ahead, highlight the container so that it's going to add the grid underneath this paragraph element. Hit A and go ahead and choose grid from the layout menu. That's going to add a default 2x2 grid here, but we can customize that. So it opens up this menu for you here to customize how many columns and how many rows you want. In terms of the row heights, it's auto, but in terms of the column, you can see this 1FR there. And FR just stands for fraction. It's a relative unit of measurement. And basically what you're trying to determine here is relative to the other columns, how thin or thick should this column be. So if both of them are one fraction, then they're just going to get half of the space each. However, if one is 2 fractions and the other is 1 fraction, so let me just configure that here. So one is 2 fractions and the other is 1 fraction. Essentially, this piece or this column is going to get 2/3 of the space, and this column is going to get 1/3 of the space. So that's what fractions are. All right, so I'm going to change this back to 1, because essentially, if you take a look at what we have here, we want 3 fractions, right? They're all 3 same widths. So I'm going to add another column by duplicating one of them, and I'm going to delete a row just like that. And there we've got our grid. So let's click done here to finish editing the structure of the grid, and you'll see a grid element here. Now, as soon as I placed 3 elements inside this grid, it's just going to put them into the slots that you see here. So I'm going to hit A, and what I'm going to put inside is a div block. And then I'm going to style this grid block first. So I'm going to call this one let's call it a stat, a dashboard stat. Inside this div, I'm going to have 2 pieces of text. As you can see here, one is what that number represents, and the second piece of text is the actual number. So I'm going to go ahead and hit A, and I'm going to choose paragraph. And this will just say average. And for this paragraph, I'm just going to say stat text. And I am going to go down to typography, and I'm going to align this in the center so it looks like that. And then I'm going to add another piece of text to my dashboard stat div. And this might be a good time for me to tell you about this find anything Command E shortcut. So if you press Command E, me being on the Mac, it just lets you type something. And this is a great way to add elements into the navigator as well. So because I know what I'm looking for, I can type in paragraph, and I can just click that, and it's just going to add it. I don't have to pull out this menu and close it and fumble around like that. And it also lets me keep an eye on my navigator so I know where I'm adding that element to. So again, Command E, or it might be Control E on Windows. And here I'm going to hit 8. I'm going to call this give this a CSS class, stat number. And then I'm going to center it. And I'm also going to make it bold. And I'm going to change the size to something like 40. Now what I can do next is I can either copy and duplicate this. So that would probably be the easiest thing to do. Or because I've created CSS classes, I can add another div, add 2 paragraphs, and just set the CSS class to the same things, and I won't have to restyle it. So I'm going to show you both ways. So here I'm going to press Command E, and I'm going to choose div block. Right, and I'm going to select the class to be dashboard stat. And then inside this one, I'm going to press Command E and add a paragraph. Right, and then this one's going to be, what did I have here? Goal. Right, and this one I'm going to choose dashboard stat. Whoops, no, not that one. Stat text is the one that I'm looking for. Right, and then I'm going to press Command E and add another paragraph. And again, let's change that number. Let's just use 9. And this one is going to be stat number. See, so that's the beauty of having CSS classes. Now I'm just going to copy and paste. So I'm going to press Command C and Command V, and we've got another one here. That's the other way you can do it. All right, what else do we have here? So we have this sort of rounded corner section here. So this is going to be a div block. This is going to be a paragraph. And then we're going to have further nested div blocks and paragraph texts. And I'll also show you how to do dotted line and drop shadows, which are really easy to do. So let's go ahead and close this grid up. And I'm going to choose the container here, Command E. We're going to add a div block. And we are going to, first of all, just so we can see it, we're going to change the background. Let's change it to white. Let's add a drop shadow. It's actually called a box shadow. So click on the plus icon, and you can use whatever settings, you can play around with what you'd like, but I learned from another designer, well, a designer, because I'm not actually a professional designer. So I learned from Mang To, and if you don't know who he is, just look him up. He recommends settings of whatever number you have for distance, just double it for blur. And then for the color, change the opacity to 15 instead of 100, and you'll get a nice light blur like that. And I've used this rule, I've tried it a bunch of times, and it works amazing. And so that's the kind of rule that I stick with now too. In terms of the box shadow though, oops, I just turned it off. We want to change the angle so that it's just pointing down. It's really personal preference at this point though. All right, so there's our box with a shadow. We're gonna change the corner radius. I'm gonna add 10 to it. And let's publish. We might not be able to see the box because it has nothing in it, so it'll just collapse. Yeah, so when I refresh the page, you'll see that we actually have all of this stuff looking pretty good. Our box isn't visible yet. Let's go back here. Okay, so our div block, I'm gonna press Command E. Before we do that, let's actually just name it here. I'm gonna change this class. I'm gonna rename it because by default it added this class as soon as I started configuring this stuff, right? I forgot to rename it. So let's go ahead and rename it to streak box. And then I'm going to hit Command E, add a paragraph. And this one will be this text that we have here. You're on a 10-day streak. Amazing. Now you can see that it's kind of just wrapped the box around the text, and that's because this box doesn't have any padding, right? So we do want our text to be, have a little bit of a margin from the edges. So we can go back to our streak box, and if you want a margin on all four sides, an easy way to do that is simply to hold down Shift on your keyboard, click and drag. You can see I'm modifying the margins on all sides at once. So I'm going to leave it at 10 like that. All right. And then inside the streak box, I'm going to add a div. Now this is going to represent one of these streak days. All right. So I'm going to call this a day. And then inside this div block, press Command E, and I'm going to add another div block, right? And this represents the day square. And inside the day square, I'm going to add a paragraph for, the paragraph. This would be how many hours we had. Let's say 8. And then I'm going to add another paragraph element. And this is going to be the actual text hours. And then that should give us this little square here, right? That's what I'm trying to create right now. So for the day square, I'm going to set the background so we can actually see something. So background being, let's say, gray. Okay, and instead of setting each of these paragraph text elements to have white color, what I can do is just set it at parent level, right? So for the day square, I'm going to set the typography font color to white. And then that way, as you can see, all of the elements inside of it inherit that color. Right, so when I click on paragraph and you take a look at the color, you'll see this orange highlight, meaning that it's grabbing this value from a parent, which is day square. All right, so for day square, we're going to add a radius, a border radius. So it's got those rounded corners that we're looking for. And furthermore, we're going to add some padding. So why don't we go ahead and add 5 to the top and 5 to the bottom. And I'm not going to add it to the left and right because we're actually going to center that text. Again, I can center both of these elements, or I can hit center for under typography for the day square itself. So that's what I'm going to do. And all of the elements underneath of it will be centered. Now, by default, the paragraph element does have a slight padding, or sorry, margin at the bottom. And so that's why there's a gap between 8 and hours. 10 might be a little bit too much, so I'm gonna put it to 5 and we'll see what that looks like. All right, and underneath the box, you'll see an actual date, right? So let me put that. So there's our day square. We're gonna click on that, Command E, and add a paragraph. And this is going to be like December 10th, or whatever it might be. Now, rather than setting, I want this to be centered too, right? So rather than centering the text in day square, which I have done here, let's unset this and let's set it at the day level. So it's one level higher. So all of the text inside of this day block will be centered. All right, so we've got one element here. Now, how am I going to go ahead and add another day, right? And make this a square instead of this rectangle like it is. So one thing I can do is I can use something called a flex box or a flex grid. So under streak box, let's hit A. And you're not really going to find it here. Instead, you're going to have to select a div block. And then you're going to have to change the type it is under layout. Instead of block, you can choose flex. So this flex basically just lays out its child elements either side by side or one on top of each other. So let's go ahead and change this div block to a flex display. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw my day into this new flex box right there. And then I'm going to copy the day and I'm going to paste it. I'm going to copy and paste it. How many did I have here? I had like 5. All right, we'll do 4 because the last one's a little different. The nice thing as well is that you can choose your flex, this flex layout box, you can choose to distribute it with equal space all around it. So by clicking that, it gives you this sort of nice equal distribution. And that's typically very hard to do without the flex box. All right, so we want to make these guys squares instead. So go ahead and select this day square, and we might actually just have to wrap a height and a width around it. So let's take a look at what I used. So it might be 50 and 50, and I think I want to minimize the distance between 8 and hours. So I'm gonna actually change this padding to 0. And you can see all of them get changed because I am modifying the CSS class for paragraph 3, which because I copy and pasted it, you can see that they all use this class called paragraph 3. This would actually be a good chance to just rename it. Let's call it day square hours, day square number. All right, so that's pretty good for this box right here. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna add these elements down here, these rewards. So the aim of this app is to incentivize you to get more sleep. Track your sleep, you hit your goals, and you get rewards at your favorite beauty and wellness and health stores. So down here, we're gonna list some of the rewards that you can get. So let's close the streak box. All right, so we're gonna press A this time instead of using the Command E method, just in case you're jumping to this section in the video and you have no idea why I'm pressing Command E or Control E. Essentially, it's a quick way to find elements. So let's go and choose a div block here. And inside this div block, see, where did it add it now? It added it inside streak box. So let's pull it back out. It's still inside there. Okay, let me just go ahead and delete it. And this time I'm gonna make sure that I have container selected. Then I'm gonna press A and then choose div block. And so for this, I'm gonna name it a class and we call it a reward. And I'm gonna add some margin to the top. Let's add a margin of 20. And we're gonna also set a box shadow for it. So I'm gonna do the same thing as before, 10, 20, and set the angle to 180. And I set the color here to 15. Okay, but inside this reward box, I'm gonna press A and I'm gonna add an image. So scroll down and you'll see image. So go ahead and add that. It's going to pop this thing open to allow me to choose an image. The problem is that we don't have any image assets added to our project. So let's go ahead and close this first. And then let's open up this assets menu. And you're going to find the assets in a link in the description, but I'm going to pop it open for you right now. So here I've got the assets, and we've got some icons that we're going to incorporate into the menu system, and we've got these images that represent the different rewards. So let's go ahead and drag it all into the assets. And now let's click this little gear icon right next to our image element, and now you can choose image. So I'm going to choose image 1, and then I'm simply going to copy and paste this, and I'll copy and paste it a couple of times. Maybe we'll do it 6 times just so we have an area to scroll. And then for this one, I'm going to replace the image and choose reward 2. And for this one, I'm going to replace the image and choose reward number 3. And that can stay as number 1 actually. I'll just have it repeat. I'll choose 2, and this one we'll choose 3. All right, so now let's publish it and take a look at how it looks. So we'll just refresh the page, and there we go. We have, probably we can add some margin above the streak box here. But the important thing is for a prototype is testing navigation and stuff like that, and where things should be located. So things like margins and how it looks and feels isn't as important. So I'm just going to add a 20-point margin right there. So yeah, this prototype looks pretty good. And now we're going to add the menu. So we've got a little menu here, and this is where things get really interesting, because I'm going to teach you how to hook up mouse clicks and interactions to various elements of your prototype so you can make things show and hide. And once we get into building the app landing page, you can actually see how to incorporate animations into interactions as well. It's actually a very, very powerful part of using Webflow. To create that menu icon in the lower right hand corner, again, we're going to use a div. Like I said, that's a really versatile element that gets used everywhere. So while we close these boxes, click on container and hit A, and let's go ahead and add the div block. Now we are going to actually set a height and width for this guy. So let's go ahead and set 50 and 50, and it's turned this into a CSS class. So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it menu trigger, because it's going to open up the menu itself. So 50-50, and we're going to change the background to black. And we are furthermore going to set the radius to something like 25. 25 is actually half of 50, which I set its height and width to. So it's going to turn it into a perfect circle. Now, in order for it to float above everything else in the lower right hand corner, we're going to have to change its position. This dictates how it should behave in respect to the other elements that are on the page. So static is your default. You can choose fixed. So as you can see there, fixed positions an element relative to the browser window so it stays in place as the page is scrolled. So that's exactly the behavior we want. Let's go ahead and choose fixed. And as you can see, it's kind of disappeared. But what we're going to choose is one of these anchoring options. So we're going to anchor it to the bottom right hand corner, and there it is again. But we're going to set some margins so that it's not kind of set to the very edge of the bottom and the right. So we're going to do that, 10 from the right and 10 from the bottom, so it kind of floats up there. We're going to add our image icon to it. So highlight menu trigger, hit A, and let's add an image right there. And let's choose an image, and we're going to select our menu icon, and we're going to add some padding to our menu trigger so that the image doesn't kind of take up all the space. So we're going to hold down shift, we're going to change the padding to 10 on all 4 sides, and we kind of get that nice little icon there now. So let's go ahead and now add the menu. Now, my idea is that when you hit this little menu trigger, it's going to pop open a couple of other menu options to its left. And so that's the menu that I'm creating right now. So hit container and then hit A, and let's choose div block. We're going to use the same strategy here, except that this div block is going to contain all of the menu options. So I'm going to name this guy, give this a CSS class of menu. And then inside the menu, I'm going to add another circular icon. So having menu highlighted, hit A, let's add another div block. So now I have this guy inside there. And I'm going to give this guy a class called menu item. All right, so let's go ahead and customize this. Let's set the height and width to 50 and 50. Oops. And we are going to set the background. I'm going to set the background to gray, actually. And I'm going to set the radius to, border radius to 25. And I'm going to change it from static to fixed, just like we did with the menu trigger. And we're going to anchor it to the bottom right. You can see that it's right there. And we're going to give it some padding. So from the bottom, it's going to be 10. But from the right this time, I'm going to give it 60 so that it sits beside this here. Actually, it looks like I might need to give it 70 like that, so there's just a little bit more space. Let's go ahead and add an icon in there. Let's hit A and let's choose image, and now you should have an image inside of your menu item. If you don't, just drag it into this div. For this image, it's going to be the plus icon, and this is going to be like for adding hours that you've slept. It's going to bring you into the next screen. Let's go back to the menu item circle and add some padding so that the icon isn't so big. Hold down shift, click and drag, there. Let's create a second menu item, and this time I'm going to copy and paste. So highlight menu item, press Command C or Control C if you're on Windows, and let's just paste it there. And for this guy, we're going to add a little bit more padding. Instead of 70, we're going to say, what is it, plus 60 probably. So that would be 130. Yeah. Oops, I moved the wrong one. Oh, actually, no, I didn't, because I'm customizing this menu item CSS class, so it affected both of my menu items. So actually, let me undo. You can hit Command Z or hit undo right here. And for this one, I'm actually going to have to give it a second CSS class just to make this one a little more specific. I'm going to call this one menu item dashboard, and this one will be menu item add, and so that I can customize it for this specific menu item and not the menu item class as a whole. So why don't I go ahead now and do that. So you can see that I was able to just set the margin on menu item dashboard. So it's a combination of both of these CSS classes that make it unique, as opposed to if I had just had menu item. Now, we're going to customize the image here for this guy. So hit this, replace the image. Let's choose the dashboard icon. All right, so we've got our little menu system here. And how do we hide and show it? This is where interactions come in. So first of all, let me show you this property. If I highlight my menu here and I under display, by default, it's set to block. But you can also set it to no display or none. When you click this, you'll notice that our menu is hidden. So essentially, we're going to add a trigger. When we tap on this menu trigger, it's going to toggle this property between none and block. So you see that? If I set it to none, it disappears. If I set it to block, it appears. So right now, I'm going to leave it as block so we can actually see it. And then I'm going to highlight my menu trigger, because that's what we're going to add the interaction to. And we're going to go into this new interactions tab. Now you can either add an interaction to the specific element or to the page as a whole. we want to add it to that specific element, because when that guy is tapped, that's when we want to trigger something to happen. So let's click plus, and it asks you what sort of interaction with that element do you want to trigger on. We want to trigger on a mouse click. So let's choose this. And then it actually gives you two different actions, on the first click and on the second click. So this is great, because on the first click, we can make that menu set display to block, so it's shown. And on the second click, we can set that menu to be display none, so it gets hidden. So that's essentially what we're going to do. And it asks you, do you want to trigger it across all of the media queries? And also, do you want to trigger it on that specific element or the class as a whole? Because if you set it to class, now this is going to apply, this interaction is going to apply to all elements of the class menu trigger. So I'm just going to leave it as element right now. And let's customize what happens when it's clicked once. So under this drop-down action, I'm going to choose start an animation. And here are some default ones that you can choose. Let's say if you want something to slide in, fade in, flip, pulse, pop, all of these different ones, when it gets tapped, you can go ahead and choose one of those, but that would apply to the menu trigger. Instead, I want something to happen to something else. So I'm going to choose start an animation, and that's going to give us a lot more custom control. Okay, so start an animation. If I had a list of pre-built animations that I had customized for this project, I would be able to select it here. But since I don't have any animations in my library, I essentially have to create one from scratch. So I'm going to hit plus to create a new one, and I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it show menu. And now that I've named my my animation, let's customize it and build out this animation. So I'm going to click this plus icon here to indicate what I want to happen. You can move, scale, rotate, you can do all of these fun things, but I'm going to choose hide and show. All right, so at this point in time, this is the target. So for an actual animation that would take, 1 second, 2 seconds, or whatever sort of amount of time, this is where I can see a timeline, and I can customize exactly at what time stamp of the animation I want something to happen, and I can sort of add an action that is based on the target and what properties you want to change of that target. But because this is a show and hide animation, it's not really an animation, it's more of like an effect. And so there isn't really a timeline. So all I need to customize for this hide and show action is I need to change the target to the menu, and I need to customize the property that I want to set. So I'm going to right click and choose change target, because I don't want the target to be the menu trigger. I want it to be the menu. And I'm going to go into my navigator and select menu. Now you can see the target has changed to menu. And there is this sort of exclamation mark here because I haven't set what property I want to configure or what I want to happen to the menu. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see that for the hide and show action, I can actually choose what I want to happen. So on the first click, the target is the menu, and what's going to happen is that it's going to show, right? So I'm going to set it to block. So as soon as I click that, you can see that exclamation mark is gone, right? So all this action does is it's going to apply the block. It's going to set display equals to block for my menu. Let's close this, and you can see, let's close this as well. And now you can see for my menu trigger, under interactions, I have an element trigger. So this happens on mouse click, and I open it. On the first click, it's going to run this show menu animation, but essentially it's just an action. Then let's do one for the second click, because this is going to be the reverse. I'm going to set the display property of the menu to none. So let's go ahead, select action, and choose start an animation. And here you see I have an animation in my library now, but I don't want to choose show menu. I actually want to create a new one. I'm going to call it hide menu. And I'm going to add a timed action. And again, it's going to be hide and show. I'm going to right click this change target, and I'm going to choose the menu as my target. And if I scroll down under hide show display, I'm going to set to none. And that exclamation mark goes away. I'm going to hit close this, and now I can take a look. So when my menu trigger is clicked on or tapped on the first click, it's going to run show menu. On the second click, it's going to run hide menu. So let's test this out. Let's close this. So now let's go ahead and take a look. Oh, so actually, let's go into the developer mode, and oh, I should hide that to start. So let's go back here, and for the menu, let's go back to this, and we're going to set it to be hidden. So by default, it's hidden. And then let's publish it again. And then here, let's refresh the page. And so now when I tap on this, you can see these two guys pop out. And when I click it a second time, it hides it. And this is how it's very easy to add some sort of interaction to your prototype. And now we're going to build it so that when you click on this, you're going to go to a different screen. And when you click on this, you can come back to this dashboard screen. So the way we do that is, first of all, we're going to add a page. So let's go into the pages. We're going to add a new one. I'm going to call this calendar and just create it. We've got a new page. Let's go back to the home page for a second. And under the menu, actually, I'm going to press A, and we're going to add, instead of a block, we're going to add a link block. So go ahead and click that. And for this link block, you're able to customize. You can choose which page to go to. So for this one, let's choose the home page. And then we're actually going to essentially replace this menu item, right, using the link block. So it's really easy because for this menu item, I just have these two CSS classes. So I can go ahead and blow this guy away and just do menu item, right? And I can also add the second one, which is dashboard. And then I can add an image in there as well. So I hit A. We're going to add a image, and this one is going to be the dashboard. So there's my menu item. Let's make this menu visible so we can actually see something. So you can see it looks exactly the same, right? The difference is that this is tappable. So if I click this gear icon, you can see where it goes. Clicking this will go to home. So let's change up this from a div block to a link block. So let's highlight menu, hit A. Let's choose a link block. And again, this CSS class is menu item and add. I'm going to blow this guy away, delete. And then I'm going to customize my link block, menu item, and also add. And then I'm going to add an image in here. Click A. We're going to scroll down, add an image, choose image to be the plus icon. And there we go. So let's customize where this goes though. So click on this menu item, click on the gear icon. You can either link to another section on your page, which I'll show you how to do when we're building the landing page, or you can link to another page, which is what we want. So click on this and then choose page. Let's choose calendar. And let's not publish it just yet because we need a way to get back to this screen. So what we're going to do is switch gears and go to calendar. And then just like before, the first thing we're going to add is a container element. So hit A. Let's choose container. And then I'm going to add a 20 margin on the right, 20 margin on the left and right, I mean. And now what I can do is add those, add that menu back to this new page. So I'm just going to copy and paste. So hold down Command C to copy the menu trigger, switch pages to the calendar, and inside the container, let's just paste it. So you get that guy there. And it's going to work just like it does on the other page. All right, and for this menu, I'm going to copy it as well. And let's go to calendar, and we're going to paste it inside the container just like that. Now, what we probably have to do is for the menu, let's hide it and let's publish it. And then now we can probably try it out. So hit this guy and let's click this. It's going to link to our new screen. Right, so there we are on the calendar. There's nothing here. That's fine. Click on this guy. Click on this to go back to the dashboard. So now we have some sort of navigation and we can start testing things. Let's build out this screen as well. So for the container, first of all, I'm going to add a heading. Just like that. And remember we created a class out of this. We called it screen title. So we're going to go ahead and just set screen title. And we don't have to change anything else. So this is going to be January 2020. And next up, we're going to add a grid. So under here, we're going to hit A. We're going to add a grid that represents the calendar. So for this, I'm going to have 5 across, and I forget actually how many I had. Might have been something like that. But, you know, it doesn't really matter because we're just doing this to see how things look. And what I'm going to do is actually take one of the days from the other page. So let's go back to home. Let's go grab a day. Let's click on that and go to calendar. And then inside the grid, let's just paste our days. So we've got 5. And then as soon as we keep pasting, it just adds it into each of the cells. Now that actually might be too much, but that's fine. So let's publish it to selected domains and let's navigate to the other page. And so, it looks the way it's supposed to. It's laid out. That's what the grid is really helpful for. And so the idea that I had was that to make it really easy for the user, when they would tap on a day, it would pop up a little card and allow them to select the number of hours they slept. I don't want to use any sort of slider, or I don't want them to have to type in the number of hours that they slept, because I want it to be kind of really quick and easy, as few taps as possible, because tapping is just easy. So my idea was that, let's say today was this day, and if they tap on this square, it would pop up that little box and it would say, how many hours did you sleep? And then you just tap on an option and then it would update the hours for that. So that's the idea there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, inside container here, hit A and add another div block, and that's going to be under here. And for this guy, I am going to actually add a border to it. So I'm going to hit under borders, I'm going to hit solid. I'm going to hit corner radius of 10. I'm going to start adding things to it. So let's rename this class and call it add time box. And we're going to set the padding for this actually. So hold down shift and let's add 10 padding on either side, all 4 sides I mean. And let's hit A and add a paragraph to that. And this is going to be like, whatever day you selected, I guess December 10th, because wow, this doesn't really make sense. Let's just change this to December, so at least it makes sense a little bit. And for this guy, I'm going to call this, actually I probably don't need this as a class, so I'm just going to go ahead and set this to bold text, because I don't foresee myself having to reuse this. And then here, we're going to be able to select a couple of different things. So again, we are going to just copy and paste. Let's copy the day, go down to the add time box here. And we're actually going to put this into a flex grid instead of a grid. So I'm going to hit A and choose div block. And we're going to choose this flex grid. Remember we used this before for the stats section on the home page. This guy right here. So we used exactly that. So let's go to the calendar. We're going to do the same sort of technique here. And so here we've got our flex box, and let's call this select time box, and then we're going to paste the day in there. I'm going to paste a couple of, let's say 4, and we're going to spread it out, distribute evenly. So it looks like that. Now the thing we don't need is that we don't need the specific day, right? We just need the time. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these paragraphs right here. So we don't care about the day because it already tells you up here you are setting amount of hours for that particular day. So these should probably be a little different. That would be 7. Let's say this is 7.5. And this would be 8.5. Now I might want to change the look of these a little bit. So instead of gray, maybe I'll make it white. But the problem is that because these are all sort of set up to be, these are already classes. If I modify this class right here, let's say I wanted this text to be black, in the day square, it would modify everything across my whole page. So what I'm going to do is add another CSS class to make this one a little more specific. So this is the day box, but it's for adding time. And same thing goes for this guy. Same thing goes for this guy. Same thing goes for this guy. Right, so now if I kind of change the text color, let's say, it's not going to change these guys up here. So I'm going to do the same thing with the day square. I probably didn't need to do it with the day actually. So the day square is where the text color is, and it's where the box color is. But for each of these day squares down here, I'm just adding another CSS class to make any changes I make to these guys here is not going to affect these guys up here, because I am changing the attributes for day square and add time as a combination. Okay, so the color I'm going to do is white for the background. The text I'm going to do is 333, which is what they use as a default. It's kind of not quite black. It's almost black. Now I'm also going to set a border, a black border, so we get something that looks like this. All right, so now for this add time box, let's add some margin to the top. Let's add 20. And we can also add a drop shadow or box shadow. Same values I used before, 10, 20, and 15%. So there's a slight shadow there. All right, so what I want to do is when someone clicks on one of these day squares or one of these days, I want it to show this add time box. Okay, so let's click on any one of these days and go into the interactions. I'm going to create a new element trigger, and I'm going to choose mouse tap or mouse click. Now on the first click, I'm going to start an animation. So this is kind of like what we did with the menu down there. Except that the difference is that with the menu, I was interacting with this as an element. For this sort of interaction, I want it to apply to every single day on this calendar here, all of them. No matter which one I tap, I want it to run this interaction that I'm defining here. So that's why I'm going to change it from element to class. So it says it's going to trigger on all elements with the same class, which is day, right? So what I'm going to select here is, it wouldn't be show or hide menu. I would create a new one, and I'm going to call this show add time box, right? Because this is the guy I want to show and hide. So let's click plus. Let's click hide and show. and let's change the target. The target is this add time box that I've got down here. And I am going to, on the first click, I want to show it. So I'm going to click block. All right, so let's close this out. And this, yeah, that updated. Okay. On the second click, I'm going to start an animation. And actually, no, I don't want to do that because I only want this box to close when they select one of the times that they slept down here. So I'm not going to configure the second click. So we can test this out. So for my add time box, let's hide it by default, display none, and let's publish it. And then we're going to go into the calendar and refresh the page. And then I'm going to tap on one of these guys and you'll see that that box has appeared. Okay, so now, just so we can see what we're doing, let's set it back to block. Okay, now for these guys right here, I'm going to add an interaction. When the user taps on one of these guys, I want the box to disappear. So let's go to interactions. So here we've actually hit a little bit of a snag because this interaction is to show the box. But as you can see, me selecting these days down here, you know, I want this to close the box when I select these guys down here. But because this interaction is being applied to the CSS class day, it's also being applied to these squares down here because these squares also have the CSS class day. So in order to get around this issue, I am going to, at least for these 4 boxes down here, instead of using the class day, I'm going to duplicate it and rename it and make it a variation of day, but at least by name. By substance, they'll be exactly the same class, but this way at least I can target the interaction to this new duplicated class that I create. So right here, you can just go duplicate, and I'm not going to call it day copy. I'm going to call it like add time day or something like that. And all right. So then for these guys, instead of day, I will get rid of day and instead I want add time day. And what other one did I have? Add time. Well, actually now I don't need this other class here. Whoops, add time day. All right, so these are not going to be day anymore. They're going to be add time day. And so now, if I want to add an interaction to these boxes, I go here, you can see it doesn't, there's nothing here. So I can add an interaction to a clean slate. So let's go ahead and add an element trigger for a mouse tap. So on the first click, I want to start an animation, and none of these are the ones that I want to do. So let's go ahead and click plus to create a hide time box, or hide add time box. I think I renamed that incorrectly. There we go. And this is going to be a hide show, and let's change the target to be the add time box, and then scroll down and we're going to hide it. We're going to choose display equals none. All right, so let's exit out of this. And for this, we want to change the interaction trigger from just this element to instead the entire class. Any element that has the class add time day, which is these 4, are going to trigger this hide add time box interaction. So let's test this out. Let's publish it. Actually, I need to, by default, hide this guy, like that. And let's publish it again. All right, let's refresh the page. And then on the calendar now, I can tap this guy. Whoops, not that. I'm going to tap on any of these days, and that will show me the box here. And then as soon as I choose, a time, it's going to close itself. So that's where I've gotten with the prototype so far. I have the home screen, so you can kind of test out how that looks and feels. And then you can pop open a menu. You can see if this menu sort of works or doesn't work. If things are too confusing, you can get a sense of that. You can go to a different screen and you can see if this sort of interaction works. My idea is to display a calendar and to be able to click on a certain day and just tap on the number of hours. You could play around with this. You could actually show this prototype to someone and get their opinion on it. All you would have to do is just go to your mobile web browser and hit this URL. It would be actually that one right there. And you don't need to touch Xcode. You don't need to build an app or anything like that. It's just the website that anyone can access on their mobile phone, and they can play around with your prototype. Refining the product as much as you can before you actually build it is ideal, because there are some things that you just can't evaluate looking at a prototype or a wireframe on the screen. You actually have to hold it in your hand and interact with it. And that's why prototyping is so great. Next, I used Webflow to build an awesome landing page for the app, because the best way to launch an app is to an audience that is already anticipating it. And from the website, they're going to have a way to sign up for a mailing list so that we can notify them when the app launches. I'll show you how to set this up with Webflow. So now we're going to be building our app landing page. This is what we're going to be building right here. And let me just give you a preview of what it's going to look like. So we've got some interaction at the top, where when you move your mouse over the image here, you get this sort of skewing and perspective effect. Here we've got a join pre-launch list button, which will jump you to the mailing list sign up. And let's scroll down a little bit. We've got some movement here, some animation, and then calling out another feature of the app. And then here calling out more feature. And these animations that you see, these little hints that make such a big difference, are very, very easy to do in Webflow. And then here we just have a couple of different backgrounds that you can add to customize and personalize your app experience. And then at the bottom, we have the pre-launch mailing list sign up, which when you actually sign up, it's hooked up to a MailChimp list. And this actually works, and it's really easy to set up. So I'll show you how to do that. All right, let's go back to Webflow, create a new project, and I'll show you how to build this. So here I am at the Webflow dashboard. Let's click on create a new project here. And again, we're going to choose a blank website. And let's call this, I love these names that they give it. Let's call it Beauty Sleep App Landing Page. I give it a couple of seconds to work its magic. And then now we have our blank website. All right, so let's start adding some elements to our page here. If you take a look at the finished product, this top part is actually a pre-built hero section layout. So we're going to go ahead and hit A, and from the pre-built layouts section, let's choose hero section. Right, and this was just like in the demo I showed you in part 1. Let's add an image here. So let's open up our image assets right here. And I've got the downloads below the video if you'd like to grab them. But I'm just going to go ahead and drag all of them in there. So all of these are images that we're going to need to use for here, including all of the background circles and stuff. So for this hero media, let's click on this gear icon, click choose image, and we will select the this one right here, the app hero image. As you can see, it's way bigger than it needs to be. However, we can fix that very easily because right now the image is set to 100%. And so we could very easily, set that to something like 50%. So it takes up half of the space of the hero section. However, I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to change it back to 100 and I'll tell you why. if you take a look at the finished product, you'll see that there are these two cards here, right? So what I ended up doing was actually putting this image into a div block, and inside that div block container, I also put the two cards in, so all of it would be contained. So you see this div block on the left-hand side contains the text and the button and the heading, and on the right-hand side, it's just an image. Well, what I did is I selected this flex container, I hit A, added another div block, and then I put my hero image into that div block. So you can see now inside this flex container, one div block contains the text, one contains the image, and in this way, now I can add another element containing the two cards, and I did that with a grid. So let's highlight this div block, hit A, and let's add a grid. So for this grid, I basically only had one column because I wanted the two cards, right? So that's that. And inside this grid, I added two div elements, and I just styled them to look like a card by adding a drop shadow and stuff like that. And you've seen that happen in the prototype. Let's hit A, let's add a div block. So we've got one there. And let's add a class to this because the second div block will look the same. And so here we can benefit from using CSS classes. So I'm going to call this a testimonial. And the reason, or maybe I can call it a feature card. My intention was that once the app was launched and we started getting some reviews and stuff like that, that these cards would be user reviews instead of these features. So I'll call it feature card for now. Okay, so here I'm going to actually give it a fixed width and a fixed height. And I'm going to give it a background, a white background. And I'm going to customize the box shadow to be 10, 20 blur, just like we did in this video before. And the degree will be 180, so it's just pointing down. And then also rounded corners. So we've got border radius of 10. So then you end up with a card looking like that. We are going to put some text in here. So let's go ahead, highlight the feature card and hit A. So we can add a paragraph in there. And then here, I'm just going to copy the text from the finished product. And I'm going to give this a class. I'm going to call it feature card text. Actually, you know what? I don't need to do that. I can set the text styles on the feature card itself. And so all the elements inside the feature card div are going to take on those text properties. So let's set the text properties for the feature card. I'm going to set this to bold. I'm going to set the color to a sort of turquoisey color. I guess that would be good. And what did I have here? It was left aligned, but I had some margins on the card itself. So the feature card, I'm going to add some padding. All right, so for the second card, I'm going to go ahead and just copy the feature card. And then I'm going to go up to the grid and paste it so I get my second card there. And copy that text. I'm just going to change it like that. So in order to get these cards on the right side here, because as you can see, it's on the right side and it's kind of a little bit over the app itself, we can align the grid. So highlight the grid here, and under align, you can justify these items at the end here. And the way I got it to overlap the phone, because as you can see, they're one on top of each other by default here, is just to change how the grid is positioned. So by default, it's set to static. You can actually set it to relative, And then furthermore, you can add a negative margin to move it up a bit. So up here in the margin, I just did negative 100 to move it up a little bit like that. Next, let's make the phone a little bit bigger because we should showcase it a little bit more, as you can see here. So what we're going to do is just adjust the width of the div block on the left hand side. We're going to give it a fixed width right now, and we're going to see how that looks, and then we can always adjust it later. All right, so for these headings, I'm going to start customizing them, and so we're going to start giving them classes. Let's call this a feature, or a section heading rather, and let's call this section text. And the reason I want to adjust these things because I want to add a little bit more space in between them. So for the section text, let's add a little bit more of a margin. Let's say 20, and then also at the top we'll add 20. And the heading is actually fine as it is. Let's just grab the text from here. We might need to adjust the font size. All right, so we're gonna leave the button as it is now because I wanna work on the button after we get that bottom section down here, and then we can configure the button to jump down there. But for now, we're just gonna leave it. Let's actually add the background. As you can see, there is this sort of ellipse right there. And so what we need to do is highlight the hero section. We're gonna add the background to this guy. So go down to backgrounds and click plus. I'm gonna add an image. So here you can choose image. We're gonna choose ellipse number 1. And by default, it tiles it everywhere, but we're gonna want to choose no tile. And we're gonna wanna position it in the upper right. So here you can just choose this dot in the upper right, and it's gonna look like that. The size doesn't look quite right because it's actually set to 125 by default here. So we can actually just set it to 600, and that's gonna look the way we want. So at this point, let's hit publish to selected domains, and let's check out how this looks. All right, so this looks pretty good right now. It looks really close to what we have right here. Let's continue working on the next section. All right, so I'm gonna close out this hero section and highlight the body and hit A. And next I added a feature section. As you can see down here, oops, not this one. This one's our finished product. As you can see here, we have a image on the left, we have text on the right, and we have this sort of circle background. So instead of using another hero section, I used the feature section. So let's choose that. And if you scroll down, you've got this sort of layout here. I'm just going to add the image right now for this guy. And this one is going to be app perfect month. It's going to be really, really huge, but we're going to work on that in a second. Let's grab the text. And actually, we can use our CSS class that we created. Right, this one was section heading. Right, and the text below it, the class we used was a section text. And so by default, it's going to add that padding that we customized to this specific CSS class. All right, let's finish grabbing the text. There's not too much of it. All right, so in order to reduce this image size a little bit, we're actually going to constrain the width slightly. So we don't want this image to be 100% the size that it is. We're actually going to restrict. We could do something like 50%, or we could actually restrict it to an actual pixel amount. So I'm gonna leave it as 50% now and see how it looks, because I do want the image to be half and the text to be half. All right, now we're gonna add this background. We have this sort of green ellipse right there. So I'm gonna choose the feature section, and then we're gonna go down to backgrounds, click plus, and then we're gonna choose image. We're gonna choose this ellipse number 2. Now again, we're not gonna tile it. And this time we're gonna set the position actually Let's see. So I'm going to choose middle on the left-hand side for now. And for the width, I'm going to choose 700 pixels. That actually looks way too big. So I think that I'm going to just double check what the size of this guy was to begin with. So you can go back to the assets. You can click this little gear icon and you can see by default, the width is of this graphic though is almost 650 by 950. And it's an SVG format. So the nice thing about SVG is that it's a vector, and so you can scale it down or up as big as you want, and it's not going to lose fidelity. So we could go very big, or we could go a little smaller, depending on what we need. So let me just pick a different position. Let me pick that one, because I don't want the ellipse to get cut off, either at the bottom or the top. So we're going to do 650 for now. Because when we customize the sections under it, then we can go back and see how the ellipse is looking. If it gets cut off, we'll adjust the size of it. So let's publish it and take a look at what we have so far. All right, so it's looking good. All right, before we create any more sections, let's go back and add some animations to these two sections that we've got. Just to look at the finished product again. That includes this sort of perspective effect as your mouse hovers over this section, as well as down here, as you're scrolling down, this phone kind of slides into place. So I'll show you how easy it is to do those two things. Let's go back to Webflow here. And why don't we work on this one first, because it's going to be a lot simpler of an animation. So all you need to do, if you want to slide this image in, is highlight the image, go to interactions. This is a tab that we worked with earlier. Click on this plus because you're going to add an element trigger. And we are going to choose scroll into view. That means when this image is being scrolled into view, we are going to perform an animation. So there are actually two different animations we can add. One is when it gets scrolled into view, and one as it's getting scrolled out of view. So you can animate it in the reverse, maybe slide it out instead of sliding in, or fade it out. But we're just going to focus on scrolled into view. So let's go ahead and add an action. So we can choose one of the pre-done ones here, or we can customize something. But one of these ones actually fits the bill. So we're going to choose slide, and we're going to be able to choose slide in. So it comes into view, and we are going to say from the left. You can customize it from whatever direction you'd like. And then offset is how much do you have to scroll, like how much does it have to be scrolled into view before the animation plays, and do you have a delay? So let's just hit preview and see what happens. So you can see that is really nice and smooth. Let's go ahead and hit publish and just take a look at what that looks like. So let's refresh the page. And actually, because it is already a little bit in view, you can see it fade in, but let's make the browser window a little smaller. And when we scroll down, you can see, I actually want it to be a little more in view before the animation starts, because otherwise, you can barely see it. So that's where this offset comes into play very nicely. So let's say we set it at 38%, and we can play around with these values and get it to the point where we really like how it looks. So see, it doesn't start now until I scrolled more into view. I kind of want a little bit more, so let's just say 70%, 71%. Yeah, so that looks great. That's a little bit different from the one that I had here. Whoops. Yeah, I actually also had this sliding out, but as you can see, it glitches a little bit because I think I used a different sort of animation, and I might have mucked up the offsets here. But if you wanted to fade it out of view or slide it out of view when it was getting scrolled out, you can just hit slide, and instead of slide in, you'd choose slide out, and then you'd slide it back out to the left if that's what you like. Let's see. So at this point, might choose something like that. Let's take a look at how that looks. So I scroll down, it slides in. I can't, actually, there you go. So that's really nice. You kind of have to play around with the offsets. And I think when you have overlapping offsets, which is causing both of them to fire, that's when you kind of get this glitchy effect that I have here in my other one, because it's trying to fire both animations because my offsets are probably overlapping. All right, so now we're gonna perform this animation or interaction. And this one is basically, let's go to the finished product. This one is basically just skewing the image and these two cards depending on the position of my mouse cursor over the element. As you can see, when I leave the element, the animation doesn't happen anymore. And that's on purpose. You can actually make it happen wherever your mouse is on the screen, but I wouldn't recommend it because of two reasons. One reason is that it's not going to be as performant because it's always going to be checking your mouse cursor position, making calculations and adjusting the skew and the animation. And so that might make the page overall just slower. Number two is that it could be very distracting for the user. Some people, when they're reading, right, they move their mouse, and if this keeps wobbling back and forth, then that's really annoying. So I decided to just put it on the element itself. So let's go ahead and click this image, and we're gonna go add an interaction to it. So on the interaction tab, we're gonna add an element trigger. If for some reason you did wanna make it so that the animation happens wherever your mouse is, then you would add a page trigger, and you would say when the mouse moves in the viewport, which is just the name for the visible screen, you know, minus the Chrome of the web browser and the scroll bar and stuff like that, you know, the actual content, that's the viewport. You would use this one as a trigger, but for us, we're gonna use an element trigger, and we're gonna say mouse over element. That's when we wanna perform this animation. Now on the mouse move, we are going to play a mouse animation, and here is where you'd select one of your pre-existing animations if you had, but we don't, so it says no animations. That's why we're going to add a new animation by clicking this button, and we're going to name it. We're going to call it maybe hero perspective, maybe hero skew. I'm not very good with these names, but here you can perform something different for your mouse movement on the x-axis, which is left to right, and also a different set of animations for the y-axis, which is top to bottom, up and down. You'll notice also that there's a timeline 0% to 100%. So at 0%, your mouse is all the way on the left side of the screen. At 100%, your mouse is all the way on the right side. And for the y-axis, 0% is all the way at the top, and 100% is all the way at the bottom. So when you set the states, for us, we're going to set a state at 0%, how much skew we want, and then also how much skew we want at 100%. And depending on where your mouse is on the screen, in between those min and max values, it's going to calculate and perform the right amount of skew. So let's actually do it so it becomes easier to understand. I'm going to hit plus. And then you can do all of these really cool things like scale, rotate, like you can rotate the image when the mouse moves if you'd want. But we're going to choose skew. And it creates one at 0% and also one at 100%. Just double check that the target is looking like it's being performed on the thing that you want, which is, for us, is Hero Media, which is this phone, which is great. So I'm going to highlight this. At 0%, I'm going to customize the amount of skew. So here, look, at this value, I can skew it by a lot. It gets very jarring and very unnatural when you skew it that much. So at 0%, when our mouse is all the way at the left side of screen, we're just going to do minus 4. And then at 100%, so when our mouse is all the way on the right side, we're going to do plus 4. And let's test this. This live preview is very cool. If you just flip this on, you can test it right in your designer right here. So you can see, look at that green arrow moving left and right. So you can see it skews. The skew amount depends on where my mouse is in that 0 to 100% range. So at the left all the way at the left, it's going to be -4 skew, and all the way at the right at 100%, it's going to be +4 skew. And if I move my mouse up and down, you can see down over there on the mouse Y actions, you know, that's moving as well, but it's just that we haven't set any skew for that yet. All right, so let's go ahead and get out of live preview and hit plus right here, and we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to skew in the up and down on the Y axis. So I'm going to do -4 for 0% and +4 for that. And let's try this live preview again. So now it's looking pretty cool. It looks almost like the phone is, you know, following your mouse. We're going to do the same thing with these cards. So we're going to get out of live preview. And we're going to hit plus, and we're going to do skew. But this time the target is going to be the grid. So let's right click and change target and choose the grid here that contains the 2 cards. Now also notice that although it's created a min value for the grid, it hasn't created a max value at 100%. So we're just going to right click and duplicate this and then drag it over to the 100% side so that we can customize a min and max skew value just like we did for the hero media. All right, so for this grid, we're going to add, this is the X axis. So we're going to, again, just do -4. And at max, we're going to do +4. And then for the mouse Y actions, we're going to do skew. Grid is fine, but we're going to duplicate it, and then we're going to drag it to the 100%. And let's customize the min value first. It's going to be -4 on the Y and +4 when it's 100%. All right, so let's turn on live preview and take a look at that. Now it's a little bit choppy. It's really hard to get a sense of what it would look like. So let's go ahead and publish it. When you're looking at the live website, it's actually a lot easier to see. So you'll see the skewing going on. It still doesn't look quite right compared to what we've got here. And the reason being is because if you'll notice how this looks, it looks like the cards are above the phone, right? And it looks like it's skewing the same amount. But in order to really do perspective, we should actually add some movement as well to the cards. It's going to make it look a little more realistic. And this is where I think your experience or maybe your design eye really comes into play for creating realistic animations, because this is something that if it doesn't look wrong to you, you're not going to know that it looks wrong. And I think over time, you just get better and better at creating realistic animations, especially when it comes to distortion and perspective and things like that. Like if you're an artist and you draw a lot of perspective type of drawings, then you'll like, I think it'll click immediately for you that hey, that doesn't look quite right. I'm not saying that I have that, but I actually learned this technique from Meng To at Design and Code. So if you want to sharpen your design skills, I highly recommend you check him out. All right, so let's go ahead and add a movement to the grid when the x-axis happens. And again, it only created a min value for me, so I'm going to duplicate it and then add it to the 100%. So I can specify a min movement and a max movement on the x-axis. So, okay, see, I can move it a lot, but again, we don't need to move it that much. So at min x, I'm going to move it -20. At max x, I'm going to move it +20. So we're going to do the same thing for the y-axis, so move. I'm going to duplicate this guy and drag it over to the 100%. I'm actually running out of space here. On the min y, I'm going to do -20, and on the max y, I'm going to do +20. Let's just double check. I was modifying the y values. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit publish and see how this looks. Refresh the page. So now it looks a little bit better, actually a lot better. So it looks pretty good. And as your mouse is moving over the element, a lot is actually happening, right? It's calculating where your mouse is and then what your min and max value is and what the amount of skew and the amount of movement should be. Okay, so let's go ahead and get out of animation mode and let's add another section because now we've got some cool animations. We now want to add this part where we have another feature section essentially. So let's go ahead and choose our body, hit A, and I'm going to choose feature section. And where did it add it? Down here. Now I'm going to change the position of the image because as you can see from the finished product, these are on the right hand side, but this isn't just one image. It's actually a grid of 3 images. So I am going to blow away this image and instead I'm going to add a grid. So highlight the flex container just so when you add the grid, it's going to be inside the flex container. Add your grid and let's customize the amount of rows and stuff like that. So columns is just going to be 1, but rows, we're going to have an additional row. All right, let's click done. All right, now let's add 3 images to represent the 3 different reward cards that we see right here. So hit A and let's scroll down and add an image. And let's choose image. And these are actually not the ones that I wanted to include with the project. These are the ones we used for the prototype and they're in black and white. But let me just grab the asset that I actually wanted to use. It's on my desktop right here. I'll make sure that this is included in the asset package. Now notice that this one is actually SVG. So I think SVGs can work for you and also against you because as a vector, if it's a very complicated vector, there's lots of different shapes in it, it can actually slow down your web page and you might as well make it a flat, JPEG or PNG, unless you had a very specific reason to use vector format. For this one, it's not very complicated. There are not a lot of different things going on with this particular vector, and so I felt comfortable with using it, knowing that I could also scale it up if I needed to. So let's do the same thing with these different ones. Let's add another image. And again, let's choose the reward. And for the third one, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So we've got these 3. All right, now for this heading, let's use our section heading class. So it applies the styles. And for this paragraph here, let's choose section text. And also for this entire div block, I'm going to put 50% like that. And then now we have this layout that we wanted. Before we add animations for these cards, why don't we add the background, which is our third and last ellipse. So click on feature section 2, scroll down to backgrounds, click plus, and let's go ahead and choose ellipse number 3. And we're going to set no tile. And this time I'm going to put it in the center. So you can see it's right there, really small. But again, I'm going to make the width a little bigger like that. And then let's publish it and see how it looks. All right, so it looks really great. And now that we have this section, you can see that this ellipse on the left-hand side, this green one, is kind of cut off, right? So I think we don't need it as big as it is. So now we can actually go back to this feature section. And for ellipse number 2, why don't we set, actually we'll leave the width as auto and we'll set a specific height. Yeah, 600 looks good. It doesn't cut off. Let's see how much we can get away with. Even 700, I think that's fine. 700 is good. Let's take a look at how that looks. As long as, yeah, it's not cut off. It kind of acts as a little bit of a backdrop for the phone. Then that's great. All right, now let's add some pop and sizzle to these cards. And I don't like the fact that this is so close to the actual image, so we're going to add a little bit of a margin as well. So for this text right here, or maybe for the grid, I'm going to add some margin here of, let's say, 20. and so it moves a little bit away. Okay, so now for these images, we can add an interaction. So for the first one, let's go to interaction, and let's go ahead and add an element trigger for when it scrolls into view. And this time I'm going to choose, instead of slide like we did for the other one, I'm going to choose pop. Now for this guy, we're gonna need to play with the offset to make sure that we can see the animation. Let's just set it as 50 for now, just based on what we learned before. And because I want these guys to pop sort of in succession, I'm going to add a delay for these other ones. So this one won't have a delay, but this one, I'm going to add a scroll into view. I'm going to add a pop. And again, we'll set this to something like 50. Actually, we should make sure that these are the same. So let's just set it to 50. For this guy, let's just set it to 50. And for the delay, let's set to 100. For this guy, when it gets scrolled into view, let's choose pop. Again, let's set the offset to 50, and the delay for this guy is the biggest delay at 200 milliseconds. So let's publish it. Let's take a look. Okay, so maybe 50% is actually too much of an offset. So let's do 30. All right, so that looks pretty good. We're going to add the last section now, which is this part where it's a grid of images. So this is going to be pretty easy to do based on what you know already. We're going to add a heading. So this heading is going to be a section heading. And actually these headings, if you know, it's H2. Okay. That's just an HTML thing. So if you notice, there are different levels of headings. You should, the title of your page should be an H1 heading. It's kind of like the most important one. And then subheadings should be H2. And then if there's headings inside of those sections, you use H3, and it sort of goes on and on. But you should only have one H1. You can have multiple H2. So I was just making sure of that. All right, so for this section heading, I want to make it centered, but I don't want to change this style because it's going to center all of these other headings that are using the section heading CSS class. So I'm going to add another class to this and call it customize section. And I will make this centered. And let's just grab the text here. All right, now below that, we're going to add a paragraph. So let's highlight the body, hit A, and add paragraph down there. All right, and we're going to center this text. And then below that, let's highlight the body again, hit A to bring up the Add Elements menu. And let's choose, oops, I keep hitting this on my mouse. Let's hit Grid. All right, so for this grid, we have 3 columns, actually, and we have 2 rows. So that's fine. And we're actually going to add a bunch of images to it. So let's go ahead and hit A, hit Image, and let's choose our custom 1 image like that. And I'm gonna just copy and paste for the other ones. We have 6 in total, and I'm just gonna go ahead and change these images out. Let's choose custom 2 for this one. Let's choose custom 3. Custom 4. Custom 5. And custom 6. All right. So let's take a look at how this looks. And keep in mind, we haven't actually touched the other screen sizes yet. So we're probably going to have to make some slight adjustments. All right. The last part we have to add is this form part, this call to action. And we're going to do that. There's actually a pre-built thing for that. Let's hit the body. And what we're going to choose now is a pre-built layout. It's called call to action. So it's got a heading. It's got a piece of text and a button. But inside this call to action, we're actually going to add a form. So let's go ahead and delete this button because we don't need it. Inside centered container, we're going to add a form. So hit A and let's scroll down to form block. You can go ahead and add that and you'll see this. All right, so let's just copy some of the text first and get notified when we launch. And we don't even actually need this, so let's delete the paragraph. And now we have our form, but let's add a background to this CTA section. So we'll choose a color. We'll choose something that looks like maybe a little darker because I don't remember what hex color I used here, but we can open up developer tools. Remember I showed you this menu and you can click this button to select an element and you can kind of see details about it. So as you can see the background color right there, these are all of the CSS attributes or CSS stylings that is applying to that element. So that's really handy. And I can see that the background color for that is this hex code. So then I can go back to Webflow now and I can just get the exact color that I need. All right, so for this CTA section, I also want the font color to be white. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit white. And I don't want these form fields to be so large. So I'm going to choose the form block and I'm going to set a max width of 400 pixels. And we want to center it. So in spacing, you can actually hit this button and it's going to center it right there. And now we can actually start to customize the buttons. So you'll notice that I have this sort of green button with rounded corners. And so let's go ahead and hit this button and give it a class. We'll call it maybe CTA button. And for this, we're going to change the color to a green. It's kind of blended in actually. And then we are going to set some padding on it. And then we're going to round the corners. So if you scroll down, look for border radius 10, and we'll change the text in there. Instead of submit to, what did I have in here? Join the pre-launch list. Actually, this one should probably say submit or sign up. All right, so now that we've customized this button, we're going to apply this same CSS class to the button that we have up here. So let's go ahead and choose CTA button. So instantly it looks like the one we have there. This time we can say join the pre-launch list. And in order to make this button jump all the way down to this section, we first have to identify this CTA section with an ID. So we're going to go hit this element settings and we are going to give it an ID. Let's call it just join. Okay, and then at the top for this guy right here, if you click on this gear icon, this is for linking. There's one for in page. There we go. So this one is to choose a page section. And because we have given our section a name called join, we can select it from here. So let's just test that this works. Let's publish it and scroll all the way up, refresh it, and then we can hit this button. You can see that it goes all the way down here. Now, in regards to animations for these guys right here, let me just double check. I think I applied something, but if we didn't, I do have an idea for it. It kind of looks like I didn't. But I think a really easy animation to do for these guys would be to slide the top row from the left in, and for the bottom, slide it from the right in. And that would look really cool. And then maybe on its way out, we could slide it out. So, you would apply the same animation technique as you did for this guy right here, except that you would do it to all of these three. So instead of doing that, because I've already showed you that same technique, I'm going to be now showing you how to hook up this sign up button to a MailChimp form. Now, the first thing you need to do is just hop on over to MailChimp and sign up for a free account if you don't have one. MailChimp is nice because it's one of the few email platforms that actually has a free tier. So it's great to get started with, actually. So if you go down to pricing, I don't know where it is, but it gives you up to 2,000 contacts to start. And once you get past that, then I think you have to join one of their plans. But most of the other providers require you to pay upfront. So I'm going to sign in with an account that I created. All right, so you might not know where to go once you come in here, especially if it's your first time, but we're going to go into audience. And then in terms of free accounts, go into view contacts so you can actually see your email addresses and who is subscribed to you. And then you're going to go under sign up forms. And under sign up forms, you have various ways to allow people to sign up to your list. So the one we want to do is called embedded forms. So if you select that, it's going to give you some HTML code to generate this form. The thing is, we don't actually need all of that code. We just need the URL for when you hit subscribe, because we have our own sign up form. So if you take a look at this code in here, we only need what happens here, the form action. You can see we want to grab everything inside this quotation, inside of it actually. So starting from HTTPS, you grab all of that up till this point, to the ending quotation mark. But the thing with this box is, actually I think we can do this. Yeah, so let's copy it. Let's just paste it here to see that we've got it. Okay. And then in Webflow, all you need to do is click on your sign up button, and then in the settings tab, for the action, you're going to paste that URL in there, and then for the method, you're going to change it to post instead of get, because let's just hit enter there. It's not letting me do it. Here, let's just change it to post first. Form settings. Let's just try this again. Okay, I'm going to hit publish. All right, let's refresh the page. Let me give this another try. All right, so we're going to go down to the CTA section, and let's actually look at the form block. So I think I was trying to put it on the button, but what we should actually be doing is not adding it to the button, but instead adding it to the form block. So click on the form block, go into the block settings, and there are different, states. So normal is what they see in the beginning. Success is what they'll see after they've submitted, and error is what they'd see if maybe they put in a bad email address or something like that. So first, let's go to normal, make sure that the method is post, and for the action, let's paste in that URL that we had from MailChimp. And then let's customize this text actually. So we're gonna want this to be black, so it's actually visible. And we can even, yeah, that's good. Let's go back to the form block because I noticed that the error state was really hard to read as well. So under typography, let's change it to black as well. All right, so now I'm gonna publish it and just double check that this works. All right, so let's go back to this landing page. Let's refresh the page. Let's click this button, goes all the way down, and let's just say Tom, and let's just say tom@codewithchris.com. This doesn't actually exist, but let's see. I want to make sure that this is connected, right? So now we have 3 contacts instead of 2. All right, so there we have it. Also captures the first name by itself. So our website is pretty much done, our app landing page. The last thing to do is really to customize, well, actually to add a nav bar, because that is missing. As you can see up here, we have a nav bar, or just a logo actually. So click on body, hit A, and if you scroll down, nav bar is actually one of those elements that you can just choose. You can see here. You can also choose footer. They have a footer, they have tabs, they have a lot more that we didn't get a chance to cover in this video. So hit navbar. By default, it just throws it at the bottom, but we're gonna drag it in our navigator all the way to the top so that it sits up there. All right, if you expand the navbar a little bit, you'll see that there is a link block. Inside this link block, we're gonna add our logo image. So hit A so that we can put an image into this link block. We're going to choose image and choose the cloud. And by default, you're not really going to see it, but if you open up the link block, you'll find the image. We're going to customize the height and width of it. So for the height, we're going to put 50 or maybe 60 and have the width be auto. And also, I want to put a heading right beside it. All right, so remember I said that the most important heading should be an H1. Currently, this is an H1, but I'm probably going to make our title up here the actual H1. All right, so let's click on container. Let's hit A to add a heading. And let's make this the H1. That's great. And let's call this Beauty Sleep App. Now this is really giant. I'm going to call this the page title, and I'm going to customize this text so it's not that big. And also I'm going to change this to be an inline block so that typically you can see here by default it's block, and you can see this frame extends into all of the other elements. Because headings like to take up the entire row. So we're going to instead choose inline block, which means that things can be on the same line as it. And now you can see the frame is a little smaller. There's also a default margin at the top. So we're just going to set that to something like 10. And we're going to add a margin on the left, so it sticks out a little bit. And then finally, we're going to just change the color of this text to a sort of blue. It's hard to see because we have a background right now. So why don't we go ahead, select the nav bar and get rid of that background. So we're going to change this to transparent. And you can see that it kind of, the nav bar takes up space instead of floating above the page. So that's why this background is cut off. So we can change that by selecting the nav bar, and for the position, we can set it to absolute. So when we set it to absolute, it basically doesn't take up any space. It just kind of sits above everything. But now as a result, we also have to specify a width. So we're going to say 100%, so it takes up the entire width. And these links are handy if we had more pages, but this is just a single app landing page at this point. So what I'm going to do is for this nav menu, I could either delete it or I can make it invisible for now by setting the display to none. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so now let's publish it. And there we go. If you wanted to make it a sticky heading so that it kind of follows you wherever you go, you could also do that. For the nav bar, instead of setting the position to absolute, you could change it to fixed or something like that. Okay, so now we're actually done with our page, except that we haven't tested it on different screen sizes, which we're going to do now. So let's go ahead and switch over to tablet and see what sorts of things we need to fix up. So for example, it shows this menu button, but we don't really have a menu. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the menu button altogether. We can, at this point, we can take a look at margins and stuff like that, just to make sure nothing's cut off, that you can still see everything and everything's still centered and it doesn't look like something is broken, All right, so tablet looks okay. Let's go here. Now this kind of looks really strange, right? Like this image looks fine. This actually looks fine. The background gets cut off here, this ellipse. And that's fine, that ellipse, because it's centered right there. So let's fix up this green ellipse so we don't have that cut off piece right there. So we're going to choose the feature section. We're going to modify the background. And instead of setting a height like that, we can probably set a smaller height, just like that. You can make it even smaller, but that doesn't seem like it touches the phone at all, so that's fine. Let's do that. And then as for this, let's take a look at what's going on here. Actually, I forgot to change this from H1 because I set this to H1. So let's go back to the desktop settings. Remember, we don't want to, if we want to make a change that affects all of the screen sizes, we need to do it at the leftmost screen size, because all of the changes you make here kind of cascade down, but the reverse is not true. So if I made a CSS styling here to fix this, it's going to apply to everything on the right, but it doesn't go up to the bigger screen sizes. So I'm going to change this into an H2 right here. And this is an H2. This is an H2, this is an H2, that's fine. It's not the end of the world if you have more than one H1 though, just in terms of kind of best practices for how your page should be structured, that's how it should be. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on here in this flex container, in this div block. And the problem is that we set the width to 600 pixels. It was working before, but at this screen size, it's not really working. So let's go ahead and set it back to auto. And just like that, it's fixed. And we'll also add a slight margin at the top, like that. So that's all good. Okay, let's go into the smallest screen size now. Scroll all the way to the top. So this looks fine. This starts covering up the phone. So why don't we adjust the negative margin that we had? If you remember, for this grid element, we set a negative margin of 100. So instead of that, why don't we do something like, oh, sorry. Let's do negative 70. That's still quite a bit. Maybe at this point, we probably don't want to cover up the phone. All right, so these are a little small, maybe instead of 50% now, we can do 80% or even 100%. That looks a little better. You can actually see it. And again, this feature layout, we had set this div block to be 50%, but on this small size, we can set it back to 100%. And also you'll notice that these rewards are slightly offset. That's because on this grid, we added a margin of 20. Let's get rid of that margin. So now it's centered again. Right, and these phones are pretty small for this screen size. So what we can do is actually adjust the grid so that it's not 3 columns and 2 rows. So we can go ahead and select the grid here and click this red button so we can edit how many columns we have. So we're just gonna start removing columns and adding a row. So here now we have 2 columns and 3 rows. So if that looks okay, then you can just leave it like that, or you can even do it as 1 column and 6 rows. But I think that would be a little too much scrolling. But that's your personal preference. So you can adjust the grid for various screen sizes. You can see here and here. So let's go ahead and publish this and just go test it out on various screen sizes. So we're gonna just refresh it. And we are going to open up the developer tools by hitting Command, Option and I, or you can go get to it from here in the menu, more tools, and then just developer tools. Now this is going to allow us to test the page. So we can go like this, make this a little bigger, and we can just see how it adapts as the screen size, shrinks. There it is. So as you can see, Webflow makes it really easy to put together a page like this and makes it really easy to make sure that your website is responsive and adaptable to various screen sizes. I especially like the fact that we have a ton of pre-built layouts, and a lot of these sections just get used over and over again. And building a landing page is as simple as taking a combination of these various pre-built layouts and simply just customizing the text and the images, and then you can focus your time on adding interactions to really make your page pop. Now, believe it or not, I've had to cut a lot of material in order to fit all of this content into a single video. If Webflow seems like a tool that would be useful to you, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. Use the button on the right or in the description below to sign up for your free Webflow account. Specifically using this link will let the team over at Webflow know that you guys want to see more Webflow content from me. Number 2, if you guys want to see me do a video series diving deeper into various aspects of Webflow that we didn't get to cover today, just drop me a comment below saying, yes, I would love a Webflow series. If enough people say yes, that's going to give me enough confidence to invest more time to produce this video series for you guys. With that said, thank you guys for watching. I hope this content has been helpful for you, and I'll see you guys next time.